wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Hey, good morning. It is a Wednesday morning, and I have another amazing podcast for you today. And the reason it is so amazing is because I have to tell you this story. Any of you that are podcast freaks like I am, you have probably seen this book being discussed. Now, if you've watched Mormon Stories, if you've watched Mormonism Live, if you've watched Backyard Professor, I'll have to ask where else he's been, but he's been on a lot of podcasts and I've listened to all of them. They're just absolutely fascinating. So this couple of months ago, well, I guess it was in September, we went down to St. George, Utah to go to a kind of a what would you call it? Like we were, I hate to use the word celebrating, but recognizing the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And we were honored to have, we went as a group, and it was organized by Rebecca Biblioteca and her partner Landon Brophy when they have a podcast called Mormonish. And they brought down Barbara Brown, there's another name. Anyway, she and Richard Turley have just written another book about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And so Barbara and Richard were going to be there at the monuments and the recognition of the event that happened. Richard got COVID. And so Barbara came, and she's a really busy person. So I just love the fact that she took time out of her schedule to meet with this group of people. But anyway, so that's why we went down to St. George. And so we all met. Many of us had not met. It was organized by Rebecca and Landon, and anybody that wanted to come was invited to come. And so we were meeting these wonderful people that we had never met before. And I'm standing there and I'm going, man, that guy looks familiar. I know I've seen him before, but I don't know where. And then he introduced himself and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Charles Harrell. And I was like, yes, I know I recognized him because of the many podcasts that he's been on talking about his book. Well, standing next to Charles was his beautiful wife, Yvonne. And we ended up over at their home, one of their homes in St. George. And everybody that was there, we all got together, met at their home, ordered pizza. It was, I hate to say this, but it was one of the best times I've had in probably the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, with COVID and then resigning from my membership from the church. We had only been in Arizona for about 3 years before I resigned my membership, and then with COVID and everything. So it's very kind of isolating. And so just to sit around this kitchen table and talk with these like-minded people who had all watched the same podcast that you've watched, they've read the same books that you've read. And so we had all of these things in common. It was so fun. So, but one of the things that was fun about it was Charles and Yvonne actually talked about the process of Charles writing his book, This Is My Doctrine. And I thought, so many times you've got these amazing men that have done amazing things behind now. And specifically, I'm talking about people in my demographic who were raised in the Ezra Taft Benson Spencer W. Kimball, David O. McKay era, where we really knew our roles as women. We knew what our goal and our destination and our purpose was. We were told, you are a helpmate to your husband. You are a mother. You will stay home. You will mother your children. You will support your husband. You will take care of the home. In fact, you'll take care of everything because your husband has two jobs. One of them is to provide for the family, and the other one is to serve in his priesthood capacity in some area. That's all. That's the only two jobs he has. You're going to do everything else, and you're going to do it happily, doggone it. And so Yvonne and I both grew up in that. And so there was never any question as where we would be. So we're supporting our husbands in all the things that they're doing. And so it was so interesting to hear them talk about what he's doing, what she's doing, and then how it all came together. And Yvonne and Charles are an amazing couple. And I just wanted to kind of introduce you. So this is Yvonne and Charles. And I love that they're active. They're active seniors. All right. We'll talk about this more. And they are, as I said, they have homes in Utah, homes in various parts of Utah, and they take advantage of where they're at. They take advantage of the beautiful scenery, hiking, biking, kayaking. Utah is amazing. It really is. Like when you go to other parts of the world, you could so easily say, oh yeah, we have that in Utah. It's an amazing place to live besides the church. So Yvonne and Charles were tripping along, and we'll get into it a little bit more. They're tripping along, doing their life as prescribed. And Charles begins to write this book. And now he, at the time, was a professor at BYU. And that's what we're going to talk about. All right. Let me use that as my introduction. Let me bring Yvonne and Charles in. And there you are. Let me get rid of that. There we are. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Renee. Thanks for having us on.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure for me. And I love that you took some time out of your schedule to talk with me today. And as I mentioned, everyone, I love Charles. You'll have to recap. It wasn't Mike. Who was the gentleman that was sitting at the end of the table? Very learned, very, very. I mean, he's one of these guys that when he reads something, it's filed and contained. And we're talking, and all of a sudden he goes, "You're who? You wrote what?" And he was like starstruck. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was cute. He was such a sweet man. And he was the one, wasn't he the one that bought a car so he could drive down from Idaho and attend this field trip that Rebecca organized and be amongst, like you said, like-minded people. He was a very sweet guy. And yeah, it was funny.
I didn't know that part. It was beautiful. It was really fun. But that's what it's like when you kind of get in the ex-Mormon world and you do start introducing yourself to literature, different books, things that weren't necessarily prescribed or read in Sunday school. And you acquaint yourself with all of these people. And it's fun when you meet the people in real life, because there is a little bit of fan thing going on there, fangirl thing, fanboy thing. Anyway, so Charles, give a short, brief introduction to your kind of trajectory of a young man going on a mission, getting your education, and where that education took you as far as profession goes.
Okay. Well, briefly, I grew up in Indiana, similar to you, Renee. I guess, were you in Indiana or
No,
part of?
No, just south of Chicago.
South of Chicago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In Illinois.
In Illinois. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. I grew up, my family joined the church when I was 5 years old. So I was effectively raised in the church, went out to BYU, did the traditional thing, served a mission after 1 year of school, served a mission to Mexico. And I always had a fascination with church teachings and especially church doctrine, because I was curious why growing up, I was basically the only one in my high school that was LDS, and I was curious to know why our beliefs were different and what made them different. So when I got out to BYU, I just devoured all the church books I could to understand what the church teachings, church doctrine was. When I returned from the mission field, I continued learning as much of the church doctrine as I could, along with getting my degree and along with finding this wonderful woman here that we finally we found each other.
Isn't that how it really works? Yeah. Yeah. You wanted to marry me, right? That's how this
Yes,
works.
right.
Oh,
I
yeah,
did
sure,
propose to him. I did propose to him.
Oh my gosh, Yvonne, we have so much in common. Okay, go on. Yeah.
So let's see. When we graduated from BYU, I went out and worked in Detroit, Michigan for 4 years for Ford Motor Company
Oh.
as an engineer, and continued my search for understanding, church doctrine, LDS doctrine. I taught actually institute out there part-time while I was in Detroit.
University of Michigan.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing that happened was, I went through all of I wanted to do a very, I had an engineering mind. So I wanted to get in and dissect the doctrine. So I read everything, all through the history of the church, Journal of Discourses, everything the prophets have ever said about anything. And I sort of laid it all out, and I looked at it and I realized there's a lot of inconsistency here in the teachings. And then I started looking at it historically, chronologically, as it was presented. And I realized there is a history here to the doctrine. There's a storyline about how this doctrine developed. And in the early 1980s, I wrote an article that was later published in BYU Studies on the development of the doctrine of preexistence, because that was one of the most distinctive LDS doctrines, right? And what my studies had led me to discover was that this doctrine didn't just come out, full blown the way that we understand it today. And in fact, initially, it was very different from the way that we believe it today. There was an idea of these spirits being stored in a storehouse, and that God created these spirits, or actually the scriptures say that Christ created these spirits. So, you start to read scriptures for what they actually say and take them at face value rather than imposing, your current beliefs onto the scriptures. And when you do that, you start to see how these doctrines develop and unfold. So with that as a start, I thought to myself that I'll bet all the other doctrines of the church developed in a similar fashion. And sure enough, as I got into exploring all of the doctrines, the primary doctrines of the church, I discovered that they also had a history that was very fascinating. And that was basically the nucleus for the book that I wrote.
Let me unmute myself. That's amazing. And I love that you mentioned, your engineer brain, because I have a son-in-law that's an engineer, and it is and my daughter is very creative. Her degree, they both graduated from University of Utah, and hers was in social work and literature. And she'll write your essays, you do my math. That's where their brains are different. And like you, Yvonne, English and stories and literature, that's her thing. And he is logical, literally logical, almost to a fault. It's hilarious sometimes. But that's the joy of the engineering, is the focus and the ability to look at things logically, not emotionally, not with feeling. And I love that you are a very level person, though, and you didn't go into it with anger or anything like that. You went into it literally as I'm going to chronologically check this out doctrinally and see how these things match up. And and you were a professor at BYU. So, and you were in the technology department. You were not in history or church history or scriptural or anything like that. So you're kind of doing your technology things. So you weren't a threat. You weren't perceived as a threat because that wasn't who what you were teaching or anything like that. So when you decided to start putting your studies into an actual manuscript, was this like after work, before work? I'm going to sit down at my typewriter, because we probably used typewriters back in those days, right? I don't know. Were you on a computer at this point?
That was computer.
Yeah, you were on a computer. All right. And yeah, because the book was published in 2011.
Right.
But that was, the manuscript had actually been finished before that, though, right? Like 4 years before that?
I finished it in 2005,
Yeah.
It was ready to be published then.
Yeah.
But I presented it to my dean and the academic vice president at BYU, because I felt like, in full disclosure, I wanted them to be aware of what I was going to publish.
Right.
As you mentioned, this is not a threatening book. I mean, I'm not challenging anything. I'm just reporting, here is the history of how these doctrines have been taught over time.
Right.
But the academic vice president called me in, had a big meeting with them, and they said, if you publish this, this is going to lead the students at BYU to fall away. And we can't have parents calling in asking, what's going on to my kids here at BYU.
Right.
So they advised that I should go visit with the religion department.
Oh.
They would vet all the things that I was saying, because they would be able to set me straight.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah.
Get the correct story.
Yeah.
In other words, the church approved story.
Yeah.
Of how it all went down. So, and then my dean told me flat out, if you publish this, you won't be able to stay at BYU.
Oh.
So I sat on it for about 5 more years, and finally in 2010 decided to go ahead and publish it anyway. I was going to retire in another 5 years, and so I wasn't that concerned.
Right.
But I felt like this was a story that needed to be told.
Right.
This was the kind of book I wish I would have had growing up, because I had all these questions about, why are these teachings this way, and why doesn't it agree with, this passage in the Bible, and
Right.
So I decided to go ahead and publish it anyway. And
you were able to get it published and then retire. There wasn't any kind of action in between. I mean, you weren't threatened with.
After I published it, there was complete silence from the dean, from the school administration. I don't know what the full reason was behind that. I imagine they probably thought this would only stir more trouble.
If they were to
bring out and call attention to it.
Yeah. Now I'm going to guess that this wasn't sold at Deseret Book. I'm just guessing.
It was.
It was? I love it.
They carried it on their shelf. And I found out later that there was an individual who was one of the book procurement people that worked for Deseret Book, who went to bat to get that book on the shelves at Deseret Book.
Well, here's the thing. If they can carry the Twilight series, they should be able to carry this book, right? I mean, if they can carry Tim Ballard's books,
yes,
with absolutely zero historical truth in it. I mean, I wish people understood that more. I remember when the Twilight series came out and walking into Deseret Book and seeing it and going, should this be in a Christian bookstore? And not that I ever thought it was anti-Christian. I never went along with that whole witches and magic and stuff that, I know there was some evangelical people that were like, this is evil, this is satanic and stuff like that. I know that there wasn't any of that, but still I thought maybe, I don't know. I mean, when I go into Deseret, I always tell my husband, and Charles, I appreciate so much how, you just really took my husband, my husband is still a member of the church, very active. In fact, I believe he just left to go to the temple.
Tell him hello for me.
Yeah, I will. So he's a very active member of the church. And where was I going with that? Oh, I said to him, you understand that visiting Deseret Book is not the last part of the temple ceremony. You don't go celestial room, get dressed, go to Deseret Book. That's not required, attendance, because it's always right next to the temple. So that's what people do. When you walk into the bookstore, you always see people that have just left the temple and they got to stop and make sure they, picked up all the propaganda that they need. So anyway, I'm sorry, there's no lightning involved allowed in this room. Anyway, so that's fascinating. Well, Charles, thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to kick you out of the room now. And we're going to talk about what Yvonne was doing while you were doing all of this fabulous stuff.
Let me put in one word for her. She was
Please.
an incredible support, and she didn't need to. She probably would never do it again. But
See, at a certain age, Charles, our brain completely develops, and we start going, "What the heck is that?" Yes, yeah. Thank you. Bye. Oh my gosh. So Yvonne, I love. Okay, as you mentioned, you guys met in your senior year at BYU. And you were an English major, which is just exactly what I described. So you're more of a, probably even more of a visual person. You read, you're visualizing the story, you're feeling the emotion of the story. And right, I mean, am I not correct? What do you think?
No, I'm just saying, so you froze a little bit and Charlie just hopped on his internet. And I'm saying, maybe you shouldn't get on the internet while we're doing this.
You're messing up my broadband. Okay.
You're messing up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So as an English major, what was it that made you decide to go into that field? English?
Mm-hmm. Probably default.
I hate to read, but all the other classes were full. No.
Always loved to read. Always did well in English, right? Mm-hmm. So I was the English Sterling Scholar. That's what they do here in your high school. You have nominees to people in Utah are familiar with that program. So
did you have to submit an essay?
Yeah, you have Sterling Scholars. It's a huge process. We won't go into that, but yeah, you had to submit some of your writing. Like if they had an art Sterling Scholar and a science Sterling, all genres, a musical Sterling Scholar, that kind of thing. Okay. I mean, I always excelled in English, but I wanted to major in music. That's what I wanted to go into. But when I got down to BYU, I just, you have to be like, your skill level has to be so high to major in music. And so I was disabused of that. At the very beginning, I didn't play piano well enough. You have to have, in addition to any instrument or whatever, I was vocal. I was going to be vocal performance. So no. So English was the next thing.
That's amazing that you said that, because I have heard that from so many people. When you are now you grew up in Utah though, is that correct?
In Ogden, Utah.
Yeah. So you may have been exposed to a little bit more, but we had neighbors that moved near us when we lived in Oregon. And they would keep their windows open. You can do that in Oregon. Can't do that in Arizona. And she would be playing the piano and you could hear it, as you're walking through the neighborhood. And I just remember being so impressed with her skill. And then she went to BYU to audition for a musical scholarship. And they were like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, she was nothing compared to some of the talent.
Yeah, it's a level, even back in my day, right? But I'm sure it's much, much more competitive now. They are the tops. They really are. They have so much talent. And that's something that the church is good at.
Yes.
Is having, I guess promoting that or just the culture of it.
Yes.
So many kids play instruments fantastically.
Yeah. So that is one of the things that I really do love about the church is, I always say my kids were giving talks in front of people at 3 years old.
Good speakers, right?
Yeah. And I mean, what that trains them. And, the skill, and then even the mission field, what the mission fields
Sure.
do for people, these
Absolutely.
young men. I remember listening to Dan McClellan talk about what it did, how it taught him how to learn, how to study, how to focus. There's so many great things about the gospel. I just wish there wasn't some of the background stuff that is woven into theology, but regardless, that's beside the point. Okay, so you're at BYU, you're on an English program, and you meet Charles
in our
at
ward,
he was
in our
in your ward.
branch. Yeah, he was the elders quorum president, and back in the day, that meant that they were the most eligible bachelor.
That's
So,
funny.
and
You walked
actually,
in, you were like, and yes.
what attracted me to him, I mean, well, that was the thing that impressed me about
Right.
him was his knowledge of the gospel was so encyclopedic. And I was in the honors program. I'm a nerd. I'm a student. I was always being a student, and
Right.
he whenever we debate amongst ourselves, my other freshman class or the people that we always talked about gospel principles and what's this, and I would ask Charlie, and he always knew the answer. It's like he had the answer to everything, and he wouldn't like say, I have decided this. He'd say, well, this president and this prophet and this, he knew everything about it. And I'm like, wow, this guy. He is extremely almost modest to a fault, and and he never asserts himself, and he never, if you're in a conversation with him, you have to really work to get him to talk
about himself and his
to even his opinions. He's not someone who, I'm the much more assertive and outgoing person. That's just his temperament. But there's been many times when I want to kick him under the table and say something, Chuck. But
that's amazing. So I love that. So you kind of started dating. And so that was when? That was like in the summer?
In 1975. So we started dating. He in the fall really of 75. Got engaged in November when I asked him to marry me. And then
and you're like, where's this going, Charles? Get your engineer brain out and see where this connects, right?
The exact words were, Charlie says to me, I'd never ask you to marry me. And I'm like, what? Because I was he said, I wouldn't ask you because I wouldn't know what so basically like a George McFly thing. I can't stand the rejection, I couldn't stand it if you wouldn't say yes. I couldn't stand anyway. And I said, well, I would say, yes, I'll marry you. I love you. I just professed all these feelings of love for him. And he said something like, so when do you want to get married? And I said, are you asking me to marry you? And at this point, we were so righteous. We had never even kissed, we never had a kiss. I'm not kidding. And so
nobody's doing cuddles on the beach.
I was going to do my student teaching. I'd been assigned for English. I got a teaching degree, and it was the next semester, the January to April. But Charlie said, I don't believe in long engagements. We're not going to wait that long. So because I was going to be teaching in Duchesne at the Native Indigenous American schools out there in Duchesne. So we changed. I ended up doing my student teaching at Gorham High, but we got married December 30th. And then we both graduated in April of 76. And in November of 1976, our first child was born. So we didn't really know each other. And the other thing is, we got married. I hadn't met either of his parents.
Oh my gosh.
He had one brother that came to our wedding, which was in Ogden, and his other two brothers, because so I was 4 girls growing up, and he was 4 boys.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we knew nothing about the opposite sex kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Yes, true.
My dad died when I was 10, and then my mother remarried when I was 16. And anyway, long story.
Tell that funny little story. I love that little story about your wedding because it's so cliche.
So when I told my mom in November, she hadn't met Charles. They're in Ogden. they immediately came down, she and my stepfather, to meet him anyway. But I said, Mom, I'm engaged. And she said, oh, what next? Because she had just found out that at 45, she was pregnant, and it was a surprise, menopausal, I don't think I can get
Yeah.
pregnant thing. And
Oh,
so at my wedding, she was 3 months pregnant. And so I said, I was the cliche. What's the difference between a Catholic wedding and a Mormon wedding? In the Catholic wedding, the bride is pregnant. In the Mormon wedding, the mother of the bride is pregnant. So
that's so
I was
true.
that cliche.
Oh, that's so true. You know what's funny? I wondered, you'll have to tell me if Charles and my husband are the same. We got married 3 weeks after he got home from his mission because I was in the service and I only could take a 30-day leave. So I wrote him, we would write back and forth, and I wrote him and I said, here's the deal. I can take a 30-day leave and I will come home and we can start dating again. Or we could get married and then you could come back to Japan with me. And he's like, okay. And that was the engagement. That was my big proposal. I keep saying, you owe me a proposal and a diamond,
Yeah.
and I mean, so I get such a kick out of these over the top engagements. And even my daughter, her husband, the engineer, was the same way. I was like, I don't know what this would, and she's like, oh geez, let's just get married. I mean, it's so funny. But yeah, that's anyway, on our honeymoon, because we were living in the Pacific Northwest, and so we had to drive out to Salt Lake to get married. And so we spent our honeymoon visiting the parents of his mission companions because they were still on their missions. But that's what we visited Mark Benson because that was his mission president. We visited the Paulson family because that was one of his favorite companions. That's what we did. In fact, here's a joke for you guys. We are leaving the temple. We've just gotten married. We're leaving the temple. We stop off at a phone booth so that he can call President Benson, Mark Benson, his mission president, and ask if we can come by and see them tomorrow. We got married on a Friday. Could we come by and see you on Saturday? He comes back to the car and he goes, we're going to go see President Benson at 9:00 Saturday morning. And I was like, do you not know what this whole honeymoon thing is all
It's their
about?
wedding night, right?
I know. So he had to call President Benson back and say, oh, maybe could we come in the afternoon?
That's a great one.
Yeah, it's so romantic anyway. So yeah, but that's that is where their faith and their obedience. I mean, this guy was basically still on his mission. And like you say, their faith is just right up there. And so like you say, you meet Charles, he's the elders quorum president. My husband was immediately put in the branch presidency, and that's just and this is why we love them so much, because they're such good, hardworking people, but there's always a downside, anyway. Yeah. So you get married and you started, you're teaching, right? And he's doing
we graduated. So we graduated in April, and he immediately got a job with Ford Motor Company. So
so you're not working.
We drove to Michigan right away and started our married life. I had Emily, my first daughter. She was born in Ann Arbor. Yeah. And the thing is, I always thought, so I come from a single parent. My mom worked, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, I always thought I would work, but Charlie had all of these quotes from the brethren about how even when there aren't children in the home, a woman's place is not in the marketplace. It is in the home.
Right.
And I thought, oh, okay. But it wasn't I was very busy, Renee, because we were in the mission field.
Yes.
And I had 5 church jobs, a stake job, and 4 in the ward. I was in the stake primary. I mean, it just went on. And in the regular primary, and a visiting teacher, and I was some calling in the Relief Society, I forget. The one that did the visiting teaching coordinator. I was visiting coordinator in the Relief Society. Anyway, but shortly after we moved, Charlie, of course, was put in as the elders quorum president, back there. I was in the Relief Society presidency. And then even in those 4 years, he was in the bishopric as we're having this small family and trying to,
Right.
I can't
And
remember. What it said.
your daughter was born in 76. My son was born in 76. And then how close are your 5 kids?
They're two, the first were 17 months,
Yep.
my 2 daughters, and then I had 2 sons, 2 years apart. And then my last one was 4 years after, because the reason probably for that is that Charlie got his PhD from a university in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and we moved to Denmark for a year with four little kids. And I said, I'm not going to have a kid over there. So
Yeah.
I did birth control for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're supposed to do birth
Yeah.
control. And,
Yeah.
the Lord should plan your family.
Yeah.
Then after we got back, then my mother died of cancer. And I just thought, I can't have any more kids. We got back
Yeah.
and we had Polly, number 5, and she died when Polly was a year old. And I immediately went in and had my tubes tied.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I felt like the merchant of death.
Yeah.
I did.
No, that's exactly right. Our son was born, in 76, and our last one was born in 85.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 9.
Very close.
Yeah. And I remember just going, I can't do this anymore. And I really feel as though, this is the thing about that people don't understand about when you leave the church. You don't leave your body, you leave the church, right? So I felt very inspired, very, very directed that this was going to be our last. We were not going to have any more children. Yeah. And so I said to my husband, you should get a vasectomy, because I had my children naturally, right? No drugs at all. Why on earth would I go into surgery when I'm, having these babies naturally? So I said, you should have a vasectomy. That man ran to get the handbook so fast. He had that handbook right there. It says, you cannot be permanently sterilized, especially the men, and I was like, wow, are you planning on marrying someone else? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not having any more. And then we ended up having an emergency cesarean. And I said to the doctor, I'm having my tubes tied while you're in there.
While you're in there. Yeah.
So same thing.
I didn't know it said that. I always felt kind of, semi resentful that Charlie didn't volunteer to have me, because it's such a, my brother-in-law did. That's he's a doctor, and he's married to my youngest sister, and he had a vasectomy because he had 4 kids, and he's like, I can't handle anymore. But I didn't know that the handbook said you.
Well, in 85 it did. I don't know what it says now.
Well, yeah, I mean that's when we were going through it. My husband was 87.
Yeah. I think now it says something like it's up to the couple. But I think they still they don't really like any kind of permanent sterilization. And I do think it is, and I think they couldn't care less what the women do, but I really think for men, it's like, in case, this is my own opinion, just in case we bring that polygamy thing back.
Yeah.
You guys need to still be, procreating at 73 or whatever,
Well, they want to raise up a righteous seed. So that makes sense. If the woman's womb is done, there's always more,
Yeah.
But you got to keep that seed going.
That's right. So it's such parallel lives. So he is very much exactly like, so you're a stay-at-home mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And I have to tell you, and I think you would agree, I did not resent it one bit. I loved my life. I loved my babies. I loved having babies. I loved raising my babies. I remember actually calling him at work one day when our youngest, our second one, hadn't even been born yet. And I just was watching him stand by the patio door, this little, 1-year-old. And I just remember being so grateful that I could be there for him 24/7. I loved that. And I loved that my husband went to work at 6 in-the-morning and got home at 6 o'clock at night. And so I had all day to take him and go do things we needed to do and go to the zoo. And it was I loved the role that I had wanted. I'd always wanted to have babies. I mean, that was my whole thing. I was the only girl in a small family. I have an older brother that's 3 years older, a younger brother that's a half brother from my mom's second marriage that's 8 years younger. And I just always loved babies. So there was no problem with that role that I was given. And it sounds as though you were like that too. Charles is doing his thing.
I loved being a mother. I thought I really still my kids were wonderful children. I felt like
Yeah.
they were amazing in every way.
Right.
But anyway, but
Yeah.
I did resent at the time, but I stuffed it down. The
Yeah.
fact that the church touts this family, family's everything. But we were, for most of all of our children's lives, we were both so heavily
Yes.
burdened with church callings that, like, I had a list of things that I wrote that, what I would do if I to do it over,
Yes.
do it over again. And I said, the number 2 one was say no to callings. But we were taught so heavily that this is a calling from the Lord, and you never say no to it.
Exactly.
And so, being in 4 Relief Society presidents and so many, I was a young women's president, and in many young women's presidencies, stake young women president. Those came first,
Right.
and Charlie was, when we had our 4th child, we moved to, that's when he got hired at BYU, was with number 4.
Mm.
And we moved down to Provo. We're renting, and he was immediately called into a branch presidency at the MTC. And I have 4 little kids, and I can't take them to the MTC.
Right.
And so we're in the rental situation, and we still have callings. And then we built a home in Orem and moved in, and people thought I was a widow or a divorcee with 4 little kids.
Yeah.
He's not there.
Right.
Then he was, then he served as a bishop of that home ward. So he was there, but on the stand, and not there at all on Sunday, on family day, and most days of the week.
Yeah.
That was those, you had your youth activities you went to. You had it's extremely, anybody who's been a wife of a bishop knows
Yeah.
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So and then after that, he was called back as a branch president at the MTC again.
Right.
And when he was finishing that term, one of his priesthood leaders said, what kind of calling do you want? I can't remember what they said, but he said,
Right.
hey, I haven't ever seen my sons pass a sacrament. I haven't
Oh
been in the
my
ward.
gosh.
So I'd really like to be in the ward for a while. And so that's when he ended up being like high priest, group leader, and
Right. Right.
teacher. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
or that kind of thing, where it's not that demanding of a job. So.
You know what? And I think exactly what you're saying, it's one thing to have 1 child, and then you have 2. And you sound like you're probably about the same age I was. I was in my late 30s. No, I was 32 when I had our 6th child.
Yeah.
And that is when I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And exactly what you're saying, taking 6 kids to church by yourself, sitting in the pews by yourself. I had exactly what you said. When we first got married and went back to Japan, he was put in the branch presidency. So he was sitting on the stand, and I had someone come up to me and ask me to go out on a date. And I said, well, ask my husband and let me know what he says, but yeah, it was you were literally just doing all this stuff by yourself. And I do really think it's a combination of just adding upon, where
Yeah.
at some point you're like, why am I doing this by myself? I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So,
And I never said no to a calling.
Yeah.
And when they called him to be the bishop in 1988, which is a long time ago, but
Right.
my mother had just passed away, and Charlie got diabetes.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It's probably
And,
from stress too.
Yes, it was from stress.
Yeah.
And I said to the stake president issues the calling, and then you can go out and talk about it. And I said to him, if they were asking me, I would say no. I was really mad at God. I'm like,
Right.
anyway, I won't get into that.
Yeah. No.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, I would have said no. But if you want to do it, I will support you.
Oh.
And he did. And it was a very good experience. I'm not saying it was bad. It
No.
was wonderful.
Yeah.
Those things that you had that came with the calling of love for the people that you serve. The people that you serve, you do love.
Exactly.
And so I loved being of service.
Right.
And I did love that. It was just too much. You know what I mean?
Right.
They just too much on
Right.
you. Especially women to be, and now women are not only all that, but they got to have a career too. They've got to work
Yeah.
as well, or they don't feel good about themselves. So
Yeah.
I did have just did have 15 years after my kids were raised of working in the Orem Public Library. So
Oh,
that was fun for me. And
yeah.
I did enjoy that. But yeah.
That's so important you say that, because if we were going to make a list, and I want you to go through your list too, because I love that, of the great things that the church gave to us. I'm glad that I raised my children in this very structure. I love the structure that the
Yeah.
church gave, to raise children in. And I love the opportunity that it does give you to serve. I love
Yes.
that.
Wonderful.
And it really, the opportunity. I remember being assigned some visiting teaching women that I thought, and my companion, even the person who was put in as my companion, I thought I would never have gotten to know you if
Yeah.
you were not assigned to me.
Yes.
And so there's so many beautiful things about the system. And
Yes.
then there's other things, but read some more on your list.
Okay. Well, I just want to give a plug, since we're on that, for
Yeah.
podcast I'm just listening to and
Yeah.
listened to before. He's British. His name is Peter Bleakley.
Oh, I love Peter.
It's American Civil War, and his latest episode, I think, not American, Mormon Civil War, I think it
Yeah.
was. And his whole purpose in that is, let's rise up and
Right.
take back our religion from these leaders who are arbitrarily forcing these things down, and take all this wonderfulness, because he saw wonderfulness in his wonderful congregations in Britain
Right.
and in England. And
like
you say, wouldn't it be great if we could reform?
Yeah. You know what was funny?
I don't know.
Last night I watched, I love how YouTube just things pop up, the algorithm that follows it. And so this Osmond thing popped up on YouTube. So I was watching it. And so all the Osmond brothers and Marie, they're all talking about their story and their faith. And I just thought, if it was just about your faith, it's a beautiful thing to watch what the mom and the dad did, and the music and the faith and the prayer and the devotion that brought into their family. It's not the idea that you had a faith in Jesus Christ or a faith in the strength of families. If it was just that, which I think we grew up thinking it was just that, if it was just that, then what a beautiful organization. But as you mentioned, and what Peter talks about, it's the theology that has gotten very wormy.
Well,
and
it's the obedience. It's the obedience to a leader. It really is cult-like. And I could not raise my children in it. Even all of the good, if I did it, I don't think I could.
Not today. Yeah. I know, it's interesting.
Here, my number one thing on the list, and it's not in any particular order of importance, but maybe because I'm a English major, but I would say, number one, don't read the scriptures over and over, because it's not, there's so much more knowledge and goodness and wonderful devotional literature out there. It's insane. It's a waste of time, in my opinion, now to have all the times that I read the Book of Mormon. Oh my gosh. And at time I'll tell you the story about how I got my Temple Recommend taken away because tell me now. So this was around the time that Charlie's book came out. It was 2011. At that point, after I read his manuscript, he asked me to do English corrections. And I'll put another plug in for his book. Anybody can read and understand his book. It's not scholarly. It's not professorial. I don't think he's very readable, and it's very anyway. You know what you have to do, and this is what I've discovered about myself. This is what you have to do. I mean, because this book, there's no pictures. It's not a picture book. But what you have to do is the whole elephant story. Don't look at the whole elephant. Yeah.
Just take a bite.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to do and I love the Backyard Professor, really taking it one chapter at a time.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it and going, oh, I'm never going
to
read
But it's not
that.
hard. It's not hard.
But it's not
in a scholarly tone. And he writes very well. I mean, he's my husband, but I've read a lot of stuff, and he does well. There wasn't a lot of editing that needed to be done anyway. And because he himself self-edited it so meticulously. But what were we talking about? So in 2000 something, I can't remember when, I think Gordon B. Hinckley was the prophet, and he challenged everybody to read the Book of Mormon one more time, before Christmas or something. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to read the whole thing.
Right.
And I finished it before Christmas, and that was the last time I read it. And when I read it, I'm like, this is not his history. This cannot be history. Just from reading other books, it reads exactly like something, a product of the 19th century, the 1800s. Right. To me, it was like, this, I'm not. So this is the first time I'm called in by a member of my bishopric, because they're going to extend. I'm a primary teacher. I feel like I can do this. I can teach 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
He calls me, says, Sister Harrell, we want you to be the choir director. And I had been state choir director and ward choir director and everything. And I said, my first time I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I found out after that he had bet because they said, you're not going to get her to accept that. And I don't know how they knew that, but he said, I'll make you a bet I can get her to accept it.
Oh, geez.
So he put a lot of pressure on me. And finally, he was going on about this and that. And finally I said, well, I don't even believe the Book of Mormon is historically true. And okay, yeah. So that terminated the discussion. We go in to get our temple recommends renewed at the annual thing. And I was supposed to get, they have, the counselors can do it now, but he said, no, wait, you've got to see the bishop. So I got taken into the bishop, and the bishop said, I understand you have some problems with the Book of Mormon. And he said, yeah, I just don't feel like it's historically true. And he said, I'm going to have to take your recommend. And I said, Bishop, I feel like I'm worthy in every way. I'd always honored I just really felt like,
yeah,
to be honest, I had read Charlie's book, and it had, I did not have a testimony like I did before. I didn't. But I felt like I knew my youngest daughter was going to be engaged soon, probably, and married. And I didn't feel like I deserved to have the temple blessings removed. And so I argued with him for a bit, but no. Then Charlie went in after, and he read statements by Joseph Smith, knowing the temple, it doesn't say anywhere in the temple recommend questions that you have to believe the Book of Mormon literally
to be historically, factual,
It doesn't say anything about the Book of Mormon, I don't think, in the temple. Right. But anyway, so a year goes by. They never called me in. They never found out. I called the bishop and said, Bishop, should I take the sacrament? Should I keep wearing my garments? And he said yes to both, but that was it. He never called me in. So finally, after about a year, and I think my testimony probably went, but I attended all the time. I was still the primary teacher. I went to every meeting. We were still very busy. Charlie was still teaching and the bishop called. I called him and wanted an appointment because I knew Polly was about to get engaged. She got married in 2012, my youngest, in the Draper Temple. Yeah, the Draper Temple. And anyway, he called me in and said, all he said was, Sister Harrell, have you resolved your problems with the Book of Mormon? And I said, yes. And then I did not feel guilty about, he didn't go, I can't remember if he went, I think he probably did read through the questions. And I just said yes, because, I didn't feel like I needed to turn my worthiness over to this male, right? I didn't feel like it. I was a little bit worried about this in the stake president interview, but they don't usually go over the questions. They just said, did you answer all the questions? I said, yes. And so I got it. So I went to the temple with Polly. I got to be there. And that's the last time I attended, was 2012 that I ever attended.
I don't think people understand the power and the worthiness interview. And I've explained this to my husband, I don't know how many times. And I said, as a white male priesthood holder, you don't understand, as a woman, how much control my life is in the hands of these men who just, I don't like Sister Stillman. She's a little bit mouthy. She's, she makes, she makes comments in Relief Society that I've heard about, and I don't know if I like her. So I'm just not going to give her a temple recommend, because that's how much power I have. And, I compare,
I have to defend my bishop really quickly, saying, I don't think I think he genuinely felt probably that, oh, people who belong to our church need to have a testimony of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I'm sure he felt completely, he's a sweet man.
Yes.
He really
Yes.
is.
Right.
And a very loving man.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really understand the intricacies of
No, but
doctrine or
I mean,
anything, but still he has the power, right?
he has the power. And the
power.
idea that you would have been prevented from attending your daughter's wedding
Yes.
in the
yes.
hands of I don't care how nice they are. My husband is one of these people that just thinks everybody's nice. And I said, please stop saying they're nice. You don't know these people. It's such a random thing. Oh, they're so nice. How do you know? I mean, especially after this last weekend when we just got through listening to the awareness marathon that Maven did. All these people, I'm sure people thought they were so nice, but that's frightening that your daughter's wedding, you're the mother of the bride. Yeah. And this man had the power to say, nope, sorry.
Well, thank goodness I was at that point.
You had the critical thinking skill to go. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, that's the irony of the whole reason why I guess we're on here is that on top of his so he didn't just teach at BYU. He also founded a software company in 1988, the year he became the bishop, and has helped his diabetes problems. I mean, but he never gave up this hobby, this theological hobby of doctrine. And I supported it 100% through our entire marriage because I felt like that his book was furthering the kingdom. It was going to, and it was a shock when I read the book, because my first remark to him after the first chapter was like puzzled, kind of like, because it was probably more like in 2005 or 2006. It was before he put that manuscript, before it got published. So it was right back then. And I'm like, this isn't faith promoting. I said, and it did after, because as I told you before, all the stuff in the CES letter, I probably knew because I studied church history. I knew about the rock in the hat. I knew about the 14-year-old. I knew about Fanny Alger. I knew about, because I read a ton of church history. I loved it. It was enjoyable.
Right.
And it was interesting. But that was the thing, to read about the fact that, well, these doctrines and the Book of Mormon thing, that was a big thing too, that I, on my own, that I just like, this cannot be historical.
What do you think, Yvonne? And I think that's, when you talk about cognitive dissonance, or you talk about how two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
What do you think it was when you heard about the rock in the hat, or you read about it, you knew about it, but then you would go to church, you would go to gospel doctrine class. That's not how they that's not what our primary children were taught. That's not what they were teaching. How did you reconcile those beliefs?
It's not what I think the difference between you and me is that I was raised in the church. I have a cultural heritage from both sides way back, and brainwashed from an early age. I heard about the rock in the hat from my seminary teacher when I was a junior in high school. I was inoculated against all of these.
I see. Okay.
And a lot. I mean, I was a student. I knew I was a student of church history. So, one of the things I was always telling Charlie is nobody knows. Your book isn't going to make an impact on a lot of people because people in the church, by and large, they don't know what their doctrine is. We give them such sanitized and easy, and only the opposite of lazy learners are the ones that are leaving the church, the ones who really take it seriously and dig into it and find out about it. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I often think about my seminary teacher and if he stayed in, because he was the one that told me about that.
So when he told you about it, like you were talking about, in order to be inoculated, you have to give the information, and then you have to give an explanation for the information.
So, true anyway. Well, I mean, I remember thinking at one point, well, sure, Joseph Smith had, the rock was like an iPhone. He was reading. He was reading off the, we don't know technologically. that's the whole thing is it technology or something? The scientists are the magicians of the past age. I mean, we are surrounded by magic now.
Right. Right.
Things come through the air and appear on a screen and on our phones.
Right.
So anyway, and besides being a liberal English person where you believe multiple things at once, like there is no true interpretation of literature or novel stuff. It's, it's
right.
or there can be multiple. So it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
And my grandma is a child. She's passed, but she was a child of a polygamous family of 3 wives, and always told us that there was never a harsh word between them. I really believe that. But I read a lot of when it's there, when it's all around you. So it wasn't until but I always clung to the fact that our marvelous mind expanding doctrines that they teach. So we have more of the truth. We're not better people than the other people out there. We have more. And I realized that these things are just cobbled together from things that were around Joseph Smith at the time, and that he added upon, and how wrong he was about things. And,
right.
it just all of a sudden, though, like I explained to you earlier when we were talking, there's a point, right? And the people call it the shelf, but you have all this cognitive dissonance, you carry it all around, and who knows what's going to be that final trigger. And it was reading his book.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it was a sudden shift in my paradigm, in my insight. And all of a sudden I'm like outside, looking at the church from the outside and thinking, wow.
Interesting. And what I love too is there wasn't like a neither one of you have resigned your membership. There, nobody's got a picket sign in front of a building. Charlie's not standing in front of BYU going, "You're teaching false doctrine."
No.
You just are living your life, and you both decided to just back up and kind of go away. And where do you, like as grandparents, when it comes time to say baptize, does Charlie stand in the circle?
No, they know. No, our kids know. I mean, we drink coffee, we drink alcohol,
and they don't have a problem with like in front of the grandkids. Don't drink coffee
so my oldest daughter is very nuanced, and she has 4 of our grandkids, and so she listens to all of the feminist stuff. She has her master's.
Have they read his book?
Yeah, I think they have. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but it's different. Yeah. I mean, she doesn't. She's like the new order.
Yes. I think there's going to be a big change in the word of wisdom in the next few years.
They take what,
Yeah.
She does have a son who just got back from a mission. And of course he is all gung ho. He's at BYU.
Yeah.
But he, when you're a grandma, I mean, his name is Gabe. I remember my grandma, she drank Postum, and she was kind of out there with a lot of, she was extremely racist, which I thought was terrible, but it's grandma. You just like, oh yeah. So I think Gabe sees us, but I hope so. I'm sure we don't threaten him at all.
No. And, that's so funny. I remember when my mom and her 5 sisters, well, there were 5 girls, so 4 sisters, they finally mended a relationship that had been dissolved for 40 years because my mother would not shut up about the church. She was determined to baptize everybody and to show them that she had the truth. And so, after a while, her sisters and her 3 brothers, they were like, please just, and so the relationship, anyway, they finally reconciled. We're together back in Missouri, and we went to McDonald's, and my one aunt, who was a member of the church, ordered a decaf coffee. And I remember going, oh, I don't understand how this works. You can't, even the appearance of evil, and it was just, and Postum, and I remember my mom drinking, I think I mentioned this in one other podcast. We drove into Chicago to go to an authentic Chinese restaurant, and my mother ordered green tea because it wasn't black tea, and it was okay. And I just remember being so embarrassed that, that they didn't understand how the gospel worked, but
well, it is a problem. And it isn't, you're othered when you're in the church. Even though, you think you're broad-minded and you try to be But I remember this was even when my third son, he lived in Washington, D.C. He lived in Arlington, Virginia for 6 years. And going into a Starbucks,
Oh,
because I think my daughter wanted some hot chocolate or something. My daughter-in-law, I mean.
yeah.
And, you have this walking into a bar, into a
Yeah.
coffee shop. It's
Yeah.
just, you just feel wrong.
Yeah. It's that appearance of evil. You don't want people to think you might be getting coffee in there.
Right. But also, I mean, I knew I would meet anyone I know in Washington, D.C. that
Yeah.
I'm a Mormon, but it's this otherness, like this
Yes.
otherness, which is, it's not right. And
No.
those are the things that I hate the most, I guess, is when the church says, we are the one and only. We have
Yeah.
that needs to get out of the
Well, and what I thought was really
the
kind of
only way, the covenant path is the only way. No.
well, in the ping pong, it's the ping pong. If you go back and listen to conference, it would have been April conference. Yeah, just April, just the difference, 6 months. April conference to this October, you have President Ballard, Elder Ballard, you have poor President Nelson. I don't know what that evil thing was. And a lot of these other going back to, we are the only true church. We are the only ones with authority. Joseph Smith received a vision in the Grove, just going back 30, 40 years to the way the gospel, and I compare that to the way it was 6 months ago, where they were trying to blend in more with the evangelical Christianity. We want to talk more about Jesus. We don't want to talk about Joseph Smith, but this one was like, we are going back to old school.
Yeah, it was
Mormonism,
a retrench, wasn't it? It was a real retrench.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting. Like I said, my husband and I are going to go to the Fair Restore conference in a couple weeks. I'm anxious to see how the apologists handle Joseph Smith translated the gold plates. I'm like, oh, poor Terrell Givens. Right now he's going, oh, crud. Now what am I going to do? How am I going to address this now? How many times do we have to redefine the word translate before you guys will stop it? Anyway.
Okay,
Well,
I got a quote I got to read just real quick.
Yes, please.
Because this goes under my don't waste your time over the scriptures. But we're reading A Demon Haunted World and Rebecca Biblioteca's book club.
Oh, okay.
This is from that book, which I thought was very interesting because it's from Thomas Paine. He's that American revolutionary guy that wrote the pamphlet Common Sense, which everybody read back in the late 1700s. And they said he was far ahead of his time. He courageously opposed monarchy, aristocracy, racism, slavery, superstition, and sexism, when all of these were against the conventional wisdom of the time. But it said he was unswerving in his criticism of conventional religion. And he wrote in The Age of Reason, quote, whenever we read the obscene stories, the voluptuous debaucheries, the cruel and torturous executions, the unrelenting vindictiveness with which more than half the Bible is filled, it would be more consistent that we called it the word of a demon than the word of God.
So true.
I thought, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Scriptures are not, I mean, the Bible, he's right about the Bible.
Absolutely.
Read that. And the Book of Mormon has terrible things in it.
Yeah.
My very, very worst part was in 3rd Nephi, where just before this wonderful, epiphany of Jesus coming down and teaching love and kindness. If you read the chapters before that, it's, and the city of so-and-so did I sink in the depths of the sea. And this is Jesus talking. And the city of such and such, I burnt the inhabitants thereof, and everybody, destruction. It's like, what?
Rape and pillage and cannibalism and everything. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So,
yeah.
Previous me or my grandkids, yes, read the Bible. It's part of our heritage. Read the New Testament, especially, the first part of the Gospels and the wonderful teachings of Jesus. Read the Book of Mormon once, because it shaped your religion. You're Mormonish. Yeah. You might not be a total, I thought Rebecca's title is wonderful, that she's Mormonish, like people have always been Jewish.
Yeah.
Mormon-ish,
Yeah.
but then don't read them anymore.
Yeah, I know. That's what one thing when I first resigned, and my husband was a little concerned, and he said, "When was the last time you read the scriptures?" And I said, "Which scriptures would you like me to read? The ones that Joseph Smith made up, or the Bible? You want me to read? And which version of the Bible would you like me to read? And why do you think that's going to make any difference in the church history that I'm now finding out about? That, the scriptures don't mention anything about, the Kirtland Banking Society or the Zion's March to Missouri or the taking over of counties in Missouri. None of that is mentioned in the scripture. So that has nothing to do, but it's that if you are an emotionally based person, if your faith is based on your emotions, then reading Ether in the Book of Mormon might give you some real tingly feelings with faith and whatnot. Or if you're, I never can remember where it's at. I don't have my scriptures here, but my people will say, "What's your favorite scripture?" And I think it's Alma chapter 50, verse 32, where the woman was beaten by Tian Kum, I think it is. And so then she's mad. And so she escapes after he beats the crap out of her and goes and tells Captain Moroni what his plan was. And I'm like, that's my favorite scripture because that makes total sense, And the poor sister missionaries are like, "That's in the Book of Mormon." I'm like, "Yeah, it's in Alma. Pick that out. Have a good time."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Yvonne, this has been so fun. And I love, like I said, I love sitting around your kitchen table. And I remember when you said,
so fun.
So he gave me the manuscript and I read it and I said, "Well, this isn't very faith inspiring." It's like, and he was like, I'm not trying to do either one. This is just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts,
He's an engineer.
He's an engineer. And I love, the other thing I love is I can prove to you that the Book of Mormon is true because I'm going to quote from the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm like, okay, do you not understand that both of those books were written by Joseph Smith? So that's like saying, I can prove to you that wizardry is true because I've read Harry Potter.
Such magical thinking. But I have to say, to you, Renee, all those things were true of me for 30 years of my life at least.
Yeah,
I was a student, so I reread and reread and reread and all of the scriptures every day, right?
Right.
And so when you're brainwashed like that, when you're all in, and I did have those feelings and those emotions. That's
absolutely
that's part of our brains, our sapient brains, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't know. Is that good? Reading, but is that the best way to live? Is that the most
and I think the
way
problem
is going to thrive the most? I don't know.
The problem is, and I remember, towards the end, my last couple of years in church, I think if you don't have a lot of earthly struggles, you haven't gone through a lot. Now, I listened to last conference. I know that, I think it was Sister Wright. I can't remember if it was Sister Wright.
The one that had cancer.
Yeah, Sister Wright had cancer. I think Sister Freeman has lost a son. She's had a lot of tragedy in her family and it hasn't shaken her faith. So there are a lot of people that go through a lot of struggles on this earth. And it doesn't shake their faith. But I just remember listening to, I'm a real big one on God being in control of all things, you know. And so when I hear people say, our daughter was diagnosed with cancer at 16, but she received a blessing. And we've devoted our life to the church because of this blessing. And she has been healed. And it's because of the blessing that she got. And I always have to compare it to the people that lost their child with cancer. And why is God choosing you over them? And is it because you think you have the true gospel and these people didn't? And just what a horrible God that is. So I had a hard time towards the end listening to those stories that were faith promoting because of the good things that happened.
Right.
And, so that was one of my things anyway. But I love that Charles was just like, I'm writing this book, and you're like, okay, that's good. And then you read it and you're like, uh-oh, this is troubling.
Yeah. Well, and we really did not have time for each other in our 30 years of marriage. or to do, we did have some good family experiences, but I would say no to callings, right? Take back
Yes.
your control, and the book was part of my devotion to but in retrospect, but if we'd had more time, it wouldn't have been such a thing, because
Right.
it's his hobby, it's his love. He was actually philosophy. He minored in philosophy. He was a TA he loves that.
Yeah.
So, as
Yeah.
a spouse, you can't resent
No.
that kind of thing, except that I
Yeah.
never had any time for my
Yeah.
hobbies. Seriously, I didn't.
Isn't
Because
that amazing? Yeah.
a woman's work is never done. A
Right.
man lives from sun to sun, unless they're
Yeah.
but a woman's work is never done. So
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I do hold resentment in that area because, like I said, when you get married at 21, and you devote your whole life to caregiving, and you aren't allowed to, do your hobbies, or like in your case, every case is different. But in my case, I had a son that I had constant caregiving. So I was
right.
never able to really just say, hey, sorry, going back to college, or I'm going to go back and get my degree, or I'm going to go get a full-time job, because I had, and then I'm taking care of grandkids like you, because parents are getting divorced and stuff like that. So I've always been taking care of children or caregiving in some way.
Right.
And so, I do, part of it is resentment that you had like a kind of a stifled life. And I find, tell me if this isn't true. Do we have to do the lawn blowing right now? Can you hear that? Got somebody mowing the yard behind me, but that you and Charles, now that you've left the church and you're retired, are you finding a relationship that you haven't had for the last 45, 46
Well, yeah,
years?
we were on like parallel tracks. I would liken us to like we were team. We were pulling the wagon, and we were
Yeah.
and pulling a team.
Let
And
me
then-
shut my window. Keep talking.
okay.
Keep talking.
But the problem was, because we didn't invest in our relationship. I think whenever we were let go, they always talk about the horse team that pulls well together, but then when they're turned out to the pasture, they
Yeah.
fight, they nip at each other, and they
Yeah.
don't get along. And so when we did have these very few occasions of we didn't have anything in common, we couldn't find anything to do, it usually ended in a fight of some kind.
Yeah.
Which is sad when you think.
Yeah.
But now, we have our biking and our hiking and our, taking care of our properties. And of course, now we have time to enjoy the children more, though there's a lot of, it's not all, we have some really severe problems with a couple of our.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that was one of the things that I thought was funny in the Osmond documentary that I was watching. Donnie read, Spencer Kimball came to the Osmond studios. I think it was in Ogden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're from Ogden. The Osmonds are from Ogden. Yeah.
Yeah. So he came to the Osmond studios when it was first built, and he blessed
that's in
it.
Orem. The Osmond Studios is in Orem.
In Orem. There you go.
They were actually born and raised. When they were young, they were in Ogden. Yeah.
There you go. So he read the blessing that Spencer Kimball gave to the studio.
Oh, okay.
And then the Donnie and Marie show was canceled, and they went bankrupt. And I just thought,
oh, that was great.
I thought, do you put two, do you see the correlation there?
Well, it's cognitive dissonance, right? But you can always find an answer to why that happened.
Oh,
why that was meant to be, or blessings that came out, the silver lining that came out of that. You can always do that.
I mean, the family part of it, I guess they all worked together as a family to pay off all their debts. They didn't claim bankruptcy, but they were in debt after that. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end, they went through each one individually and the horrible health problems they all had. Okay. And it's like, a car accident, heart attack, multiple sclerosis, just really major health problems that all of them have had. Depression, major depression and stuff like that. But their faith and their family is what's kept them together. That's what the message was. And I think that's true. I think that's true. I don't think it has anything to do with Jesus, but I do think it has to do with family and love.
And family and togetherness. However, it can be uniting, and it can also be very divisive if somebody doesn't have that faith, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're like LGBTQ, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But if you don't, the problem with the church is that, and this taught by President Nelson, this latest one is a typical example of it. If you're not on the covenant path, if you don't believe, it just cuts families right in half. It cuts marriages right in half. That's not, that can't be right. You can't.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can't.
Well, and that was what was so disturbing about that, especially having that talk be the final talk at the conference weekend, was the weaponizing
Yeah.
of people that don't believe and separating in families. And I thought, because I have left the church and I have a brother that's still active and a mother that's still active, and she, we don't have a good relationship, but if we ever had a thread of possibility, it's been cut off now because she's been directed by her prophet not to listen to anything I say or to even,
You're a
bother.
non-believer.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I thought I loved one of the TikToks. Oh gosh, who was it? It was brilliant. They put up Lori Daybell, Ruby Frankie, Tim Ballard, and they do the mouth simulation, and they were like, we're believers, we're believers,
Yeah.
we're believers. And Chad Daybell, and I'm like, yeah, he was a believer, and look what happened, because you trusted him. You
Yes.
trusted Tim Ballard because he was a believer. So
Yes.
giving people instruction to only trust those that believe.
Oh yeah, that's very bad.
Yeah. Well, you're amazing. Well, you're in St. George, and when you get back up here, we're going to do something. We're going to get together, go out for dinner.
Great.
So it's a plan. Thank you so much for joining me today. And tell Charles, thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You say bye. Okay.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Do you not? I mean, this is what I'm talking about. The name of this podcast is She Became Visible. And Yvonne is a perfect example of a woman behind the scenes that made their life work. And the direction and the indoctrination and everything that she went through, but they've stayed together. They have a fabulous marriage. And I love that she admitted that it was hard, and that they're building a relationship now because they lived parallel lives. How many of you have lived parallel lives? My husband and I, completely parallel lives, as you said. And then after he retired, we had nothing in common. And his whole conversation was his life. This is what happened to me when I was at work. And this is what happened to me with this guy that I knew at work. And everything was related to his work. And after a while, I was like, I don't want to hear about your work anymore. I've lived you and your work, for this many years. And so we are just now that I've left the church, which frees us up to do a lot of things, and he's retired, we're getting to know each other again and building a life together again. And so when I hear conference, I forget who it was, it might've been, what was it, Renland, that was encouraging missionaries, senior people to go on missions. And I thought, it just doesn't stop. When are you going to let these two people get to know each other and enjoy each other and enjoy life? There's just so many things. I'm going to be talking with Carrie Schertz this Sunday. He's going to be on my podcast, and I'm going to be on his podcast. We're going to be doing a recap of conference, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some of these principles that were taught. So thank you for joining me today. Ladies, if you're listening, please stand up. Please become visible. Do whatever you need to do. Find yourself and promote yourself and encourage yourself to be all that you can be. All right. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.